Hello guys, and welcome back to Bradley Hall's Guitar School for this very special riff writing masterclass. So, while we do primarily cover lead guitar here at the Guitar School, I do think, however, it is super important to be maintaining your rhythm chops as much as you possibly can. As well as the obvious advantages of keeping your picking hand dexterous and being a great way to practice your hand synchronization, riff writing is also a bloody fantastic way to get you thinking more about overall harmony and composition, and understanding how to work within the structure of a key. So in this here riff writing masterclass, I'm going to show you how myself and many other countless pro guitarists approach riff writing and composition, and how you can apply these principles to your playing as well. And what's especially great about these principles is that they can be applied to literally guitar players of any ability level. But do keep in mind that there will be some light theory mentioned in this video, so if there's anything you don't understand, please do go refer to my ebooks that you can download for free here at the Guitar School, or if that still doesn't answer your questions, then just drop a comment down below. So without further ado, let's get riffing. So, principle number one, using a scale to write a riff. So this is a great place to start if you're perhaps stuck for ideas, or if you're quite new to riff writing and you really have like no idea where to start. I found that picking a scale and writing a riff around that scale is a bloody amazing way to get started. I found that picking a scale and writing a riff around it is one of the best ways that you can get started. This is because it gives a little bit of context to what you're writing and adds like a rough framework. So instead of just like, looking down at a whole entire blank canvas of a fretboard and having no idea where to start, if you pick a scale, then you at least have like a jumping off point, right? And even if you don't end up strictly sticking to the scale like super rigidly and sort of deviate from it a bit, it doesn't matter, because you've given yourself a jumping off point, like somewhere to start, and it's going to give your song like, a little bit of context. So we're going to start with a super basic example with the good old E minor scale in root position, so down here. Probably the most basic scale that you could start with, but a great one to start with because it gives you access to, good old open E power chord. So if you're unsure of this scale, just take a moment to study the notes. We've just got 0, 2, 3 on the bottom string, then 0, 2, 3 on the A string, and 0, 2 on the D string. We're only going to work within one octave for now. So firstly, we're going to identify what exactly we can use in this scale to make a riff. So of course you can use just like individual notes. Something like that, kind of like an Iron Maiden style thing. Or you can pick out like power chord shapes. Obviously we've got the E we can use here. We can use the G. We've got a C we can use. We've got all these different power chord shapes that we can use that comprise the notes of the scale. Because if you look at an E power chord, it's just got an E and B, which are in the scale. A G power chord is a G and D, which we have in the scale. C power chord is a C and G, which we have in the scale. So there's loads of options. So at the most sort of basic level, you can make a power chord type riff around the E minor, sort of going. Something like that. And if you want to start experimenting a bit more, you can start playing with dyads. So dyads are basically just like two notes of a chord played in tandem. Like a triad is all three notes of a chord, like a E minor triad is that. But if you just want a dyad, it could just be like the root and the third, or the third and the fifth together, like that. And what I like to do is experiment with seeing how many different dyads you can make with the notes of a scale. So if you take the E minor scale that we're looking at, you could play the G and the B together to make like a G major kind of dyad. That sounds really cool. You've got F sharp and B together, which sounds very cool. You could call that like an inverted B power chord, or I don't know, like a F sharp sus4 or something. You could also get spicy and make like a tritone here with F sharp and C. Because these are still two notes that are within the E minor scale. You could make this just like a D major dyad, F sharp and D together. these together, G, B and G. Another way of playing a G major. See, there are so many possibilities just within this very, very basic open E minor scale. So in this first example I'm going to show you, I've made a very simple riff out of the scale of E minor, which combines some basic power chord shapes with some basic dyad shapes to create a very basic, straightforward riff, but I think it sounds pretty cool. So as you can see, I'm just starting on a E power chord. Then I'm just adding this G here to make it like a G major dyad. And I've got this F sharp and B together. Make like a kind of a sus4 thing. Then I'm adding the tritone here, the C, to make it like an F sharp diminished. So it's a very, very painfully simple riff, but it's pretty effective and makes use of some shapes that you might not normally play. So let's take another example to use the same principles but maybe on a scale that's a little bit more adventurous. So let's try the harmonic minor scale in A. So a harmonic minor scale is just a basic regular minor scale like we played before, but it has a sharp 7th degree, which gives it that kind of like, you know, exotic-y, Middle Eastern kind of flavour. And this is a very, very popular riff when it comes to metal. You know, if you look at basically any Lamb of God riff, for example, it's all over the harmonic minor scale. Like we did with the E minor scale, let's just take a look at some shapes that we can use within the harmonic minor scale. So, you know, we know the ones that we can use from before, like the basic power chord shapes. But we also have this new note to play with now. So this gives us some more opportunities to use some shapes that we couldn't use with the previous scale pattern. I think the most obvious one would be we can make this E major dyad here. It's like a 7th fret on the A string, 6th fret on the D string. Because if you were playing a regular minor scale, it would be a E minor dyad. But because it's harmonic minor, that note gets sharpened. So you get a E major, and this can be used to great effect, especially if you sort of like use it in combination with the F. You get that very sort of like harmonic minor, Middle Eastern kind of sound. You do all this sort of stuff. It also gives you the option for like another diminished shape here you could play. The D and the G sharp here. What else can you use? You can make a F minor here, which is pretty cool. So like you can use both an F major and F minor here. Sounds pretty sweet. So let's take a look at the second example riff I've made, where again it's a not too complicated riff that only uses notes out of the A harmonic minor scale this time. Let's have a look. So, as you can see, I'm using these major dyad shapes, the E and the F, to great effect here to really emphasize that harmonic minor sound. And I'm also using these dyads here, which I think sound pretty cool. This sounds super cool and is just, again, very indicative of that harmonic minor sound because we're making extensive use of this sharpened note. This 6th fret on the D string. So I'm going 5 and 6 here together, and then moving the root down a tone, 3 and 6, and then one more semitone to 2 and 6. And again, this is simply all just within A harmonic minor. I've just experimented with different shapes, like different dyad shapes, and just moving them around in a way which I think sounds cool. And that is my very, very simple method of how you can start writing riffs using a scale as a jumping off point. So I would recommend picking a scale, whether it's minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, or major, or something crazy like, I don't know, the whole tone scale could be cool. And and just have a play, like visualize the scale on your fretboard in just one octave to start with, and just start playing around with all the different chord shapes that you can get out of it. If it's just like power chords, or like dyad shapes, or maybe even triads, you could expand it to if you want to do, you know, something a bit more adventurous. So yeah, maybe take one of the drum beats that I provided with this lesson and just start experimenting with it and see what you come up with. Alrighty, so principle number 2 is rhythm and syncopation. Generally, you can spot someone who's not as experienced in riff writing is that everything they write is just in like straight 8th notes or straight 16th notes, and it's just very sort of like monotone and constant and like metronomic, which is perfectly fine. You know, there's many examples of amazing legendary riffs that just use like straight 8ths or straight 16ths and don't do anything too crazy with the rhythm. So I think writing a good riff is sort of like, imagine a Venn diagram. You've got harmony on one side and you've got rhythm on one side, and then you've got this overlap point in the middle. And I feel like most guitarists sort of concentrate maybe a bit too much on the harmony side of things and kind of neglect the rhythm side. So I'm going to show you some ways in which you can start experimenting with rhythm and make your riffs a little bit more exciting rhythmically. So first off, I'm going to show you an example of a riff I made which is very boring harmonically and has very boring rhythm. It's just a very boring flat riff, just to show you maybe the sort of riff writing that you want to generally avoid. As you can see, there's really nothing adventurous going on rhythmically. It's all just straight 8th notes. Da, 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 da. There's no rests, there's no variation in the note values, there's no syncopation. It's just not very interesting. So now I'm going to show you an example of the riff which has slightly more interesting rhythm. So, as you can hear, I've stuck to the same notes and the same sort of like riff structure, but all I've done is mix the rhythm up ever so slightly just to make it a little bit more like dynamic and interesting. So, if you look at the first bar here, you see we're starting off exactly the same with 2 8th notes just going like this. But, as you can see here, instead I've got a rest of one whole beat. So, we're going rest for one beat, and then after that, you see I've added some 16th notes in to have this sort of like little galloping rhythm. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm now going like this. So this whole bar now goes rest. As you can see, it's not really that big a change, but it's enough just to make it groove a little more, right? Just make it a little bit more like dynamic. And then in the second bar, again, instead of going straight 8th notes, we're going kind of like a Metallica kind of rhythm. So like 2 8th notes followed by a whole note. Dum dum bam, dum dum bam. So those two bars together now, instead of going, it's going like that. And it's doing exactly the same thing for the next 2 bars, but obviously the chords change. It still goes down to F sharp and then F. So the whole thing now goes. So hopefully you can hear that just even these fairly minor changes to the rhythm just make such a big difference. And if you're unsure of how to fiddle with rhythms like this, then I would definitely recommend using some sort of transcription software like Guitar Pro here. It's just an amazing, invaluable tool to get to grips with stuff like this, because you can like, you know, just do trial and error basically just to see what works. For example here, you know, I could choose to make this an 8th note rest instead, and then, I don't know, make this a whole note instead and see how that sounds. See, and that gives it a different feel altogether. And so, as you can see, you don't really need to be like some sort of, you know, virtuoso expert with rhythms. You can just sit here with software and just literally use trial and error changing rhythm values and just playing it back and then just seeing what works and what doesn't. It's really as simple as that. So yeah, if you're unsure and not too confident with rhythm stuff, I would absolutely recommend getting some sort of software like this and just start experimenting, using trial and error. It just clicked very quickly, like it's quite intuitive. So once you've got to grips with experimenting with some slightly more interesting rhythms, the next step I think will be starting to incorporate some syncopation into your riffs. So what is syncopation? Great question. So the textbook definition of syncopation is a musical technique that involves temporarily displacing the regular metric accent by emphasizing offbeats or weak beats. That sounds very complicated on paper, but trust me, it's really quite simple. So instead of playing straightly on the beat, like bam, 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 like that, you're playing off the beat like this. Bam, 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 bam. So basically, if you take the riff I made before as an example, you'll hear that everything is sort of like very on the beat and metronomic. You know, nothing on the offbeat is emphasized. It's all just like dong, 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 dong. So if I play this back to you with the metronome, you'll hear that everything is very much on the beat and precise. Yeah, nothing strays from the beat. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Sometimes this is exactly the sort of thing that you need. But, you know, music is all about contrast and tension and release. So I feel like good metal songs have a healthy mix of, you know, more sort of metronomic riffs like this and more syncopated riffs like what I'm about to show you. So in this next example I'm about to show you, I've taken, again, this same riff, but just tweaked the rhythms again to incorporate some more sort of syncopated rhythms, and hopefully you'll hear what I mean. And so what you'll find is that adding more syncopated elements into a riff really sort of enhances the groove. So if you look at a lot of types of music which, you know, are really sort of made to make people dance, like funk, like soul, Motown, all of this stuff is like, there's syncopation all over it because syncopation really just sort of like make things groove harder. So in the context of this riff, this first bar is going, yeah, so it's very similar to the previous example, but we just have this little pickup here, which just makes it groove a little bit harder. And this next bar, instead of going, we're now using these dotted notes here and going. So if it was straight notes, it would be going, but we're using dotted notes, which extends the value of the note by 50%. So a dotted quarter note like this is worth 1.5 quarter notes. So basically a quarter note and an eighth note together. So instead of going, it goes. So if we compare those first two bars in both of these examples, the first example goes like this, bum bum, buddle bum bam bam bam, which is very straight and metronomic as discussed before. And the second example goes bum bum, buddle bum bam bam. It's a very subtle difference, but it just makes it groove that little bit more. And the third bar, this is where things get a little more spicy. As you can see here, I've completely taken out the first eighth note that we had here. You see, in the first example, we had, yeah, and what I've done here is replace it with an eighth note rest instead. So the first eighth of the bar is dropped, which gets you that really sort of like you know, ska kind of thing. Like a 1, 2, 3, 4, bam, 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 that kind of thing, right? So now this bar is going 1, 2, 3, 4. And having that dropped note at the start really adds to the groove like exceptionally well. And then the fourth bar, again, just uses the same pattern that we had here with the dotted notes. So yeah, hopefully you can hear that through the use of syncopation, you can really enhance the groove of a riff. And you can do this by splitting rests in half. Like here, we split the quarter note rest into an eighth note rest, then having like these little pickup notes, and using dotted notes just to sort of like displace a note into like the next beat. And also by dropping notes at the very start of a bar and using rest instead can also really accentuate groove. Right, so what I'd advise you to do now is to perhaps take the riff or riffs that you were playing about with in the first section where you were making riffs out of scales, and perhaps try fiddling with the rhythms to make them a little bit more interesting, more dynamic, maybe adding some syncopation to make them groove harder, and just see what you can come up with. Alrighty, so principle number 3 is structure. A lot of the times when people on the Guitar School Discord server show me their riffs for feedback, I'd say the biggest critique that I have majority of the time is just repetitiveness and riffs just not having like enough variation throughout their runtime. And again, like previous examples, this doesn't have to be the case all the time. There are some amazing riffs out there that are like super repetitive and monotone, but just work within the context of the song. So I'm not saying that like all riffs have to be like that, but as a general rule of thumb, I try to give my riffs like some sort of structure with kind of like a beginning, middle and end somewhat, right? I try to give them some semblance of a structure most of the time. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways you can do that very easily. So the first example I'm going to show you here is of a very repetitive riff that I've come up with. I still think it's a decent riff, but it doesn't really like go anywhere or do much. It just repeats like the same 2-bar pattern over and over again. And it goes like this. Honestly, this riff in itself, it's not really that bad and it would still work fine in a song, I guess. But like I said previously, I like my riffs personally to have a little bit of variety to them. So let's look at some ways in which we can change it. So to do this and to start thinking in terms of structure, I find it's best to map out your riffs in like blocks visually. And so you can see what the structure is like. So for example, in this first riff, you know, it's just like a 2-bar repeating phrase. So if we label like the first bar A and the second bar B, you can see that the riff just goes A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. And doing this enables you to see visually in front of you that, oh shit, my riff is actually really repetitive and maybe it needs some other sections too, just to mix things up a bit. So I'm going to show you a couple of variations of this A, B, A, B, A, B pattern that we can use to just spice our riffs up a little bit. This first variation is what we're calling the ABAC, ABAD. So what we're doing, I'm sure you can figure this out, is just we're going ABA, which is essentially the first 3 bars of our riff. So it's like the first bar, second bar, then the first bar repeated again. But then we're having a C section, that sounds a bit weird, which is going to be like a slight variation, something a bit different. And then afterwards, we're going to go back to our original 3 bars, A, B, A, and then we have a D bar at the end, which again is something a bit different, even still, another variation tacked on at the end. So we're going A, B, A, C, A, B, A, D. And this is a really, really common way to map out riffs and to think about structure. So this second example I'm about to show you does just that. It uses the ABAC, ABAD structure to just add a slight bit of variation to our original riff. Let's have a look. Alright, so if we look at the tab for this example, we can see we're starting on our A bar and then B bar, which is just exactly the same as the first example. Yeah, so exactly the same. And then we're going back to our A bar again, which is just the same as the first. But then we have our C bar right here. And we've done something completely different. We're going... As you can hear, this is a complete switch up from the first 3 bars. We're using some different chords and some slightly different rhythm just to create a contrast. And I think that should be the goal of this C bar and this D bar coming up. They should contrast the first 3 bars to do something a bit different. You can still stay within like the same scale or whatever if you're working in that sort of framework. But as you can see, like I've gone outside of the scale a bit. You know, I'm generally sort of sticking around like E Phrygian. I've gone up to here, doing some big stacked power chords. Then have this sort of like cool diminished slidey thing. So this sort of like pretty much just breaks out of what I was doing before with something completely different. But it doesn't sound so different that it sounds too disjointed, like it doesn't belong. But it's different enough that it creates like a good amount of contrast, both rhythmically and harmonically, that it's just going to sort of just like sandwich up the riff and just give it a bit of variation. And then after that bar, we go back to our original ABA, which is just exactly the same as before. And then our D bar. as you can see, it's fairly similar to our C bar, but just with a slightly different ending. So instead of going, we're going. And that's generally how I approach having these different tails, what we call them, like the C bar and the D bar, is that I feel like this, like the C and the D should be somewhat related, but be contrasting enough to the A and the B. So the A and the B are like pretty similar. Like the A sort of like lays the foundation, the B does a slight sort of variation on the A, and then back to the original A, and then the C is something really contrasting to the A and the B. And then we go back to the original A and B, and then we have the D, which is similar to the C, but again, ever so slightly, like a slight variation on that. Hopefully that makes sense. This is generally, I guess, like the safest and most sort of like tried and tested way that you can structure your riffs. So let's take things even further with this next example. So instead of going A, B, A, C, A, B, A, D, we're now going A, B, C, D, A, B, E, F. Okay, and let's hear what that sounds like. So if we take a look at the tab, we can see that we're starting off with the same principle. We're starting with our A bar and our B bar. But then we're going to some new variations straight away. Instead of going back to our A bar, we're going straight in with a C and a D. And what I generally tend to do is make sure that the C and the D bar sort of like they belong to each other. And what you want to do is to have these sort of like as a call and response. I talk about this a lot in the phrasing video. So if you want to learn more about call and response, like philosophies, then go check that masterclass out. But we're using the same sort of principle. We're making our call and then our response, which is sort of like a mirror, like a mirroring contrast of the first one. Again, it could be good to like change up the harmony a bit and change up the rhythm to make it more contrasting to the first two bars, because you don't just want like 4 bars of the same thing, right? Then it's not really contrasting. Again, it has to be different enough to make it like a contrast, like a mirror, but it can't be too different that it just sounds really disjointed and sounds like it doesn't belong to the original riff. And that's the sort of thing that comes with experience, is like knowing like which notes to use and where to go and what rhythms to use for like your contrasting section. But if you play around enough, you'll start to develop a good ear for it. Then after that, we're going back to our original A and B, and then we have our E and F, which is similar to our C and D, but a slight variation on it, just like how we did in the previous example. So instead of going, we're going. So if we compare the C and the E bar, you can see they start off the same, like the first half of the bar is the same, but the second half of the bar changes. And if we compare the D bar and the F bar, same again. The first half of the bar stays the same, but the second half of the bar changes. And this is a great little sort of blueprint you can use in your own riffs to keep like the first half of the bars the same, but just have like a variation in the second half. So there's some familiarity, but enough variation to keep things, keep things moving. Whoa, I know that was a lot of information, so I hope that all made sense. I tried my best to explain it as clearly as I can. So I would recommend going back to your riffs that you've been coming up with as you've been going along with this masterclass. You started writing a riff with the scales, and then you started playing around with the rhythms, maybe adding some syncopation, and now maybe start looking at the structure. So take your riff and just map it out into blocks with the letters A, B, C, D, etc., and then start playing around with the structure and thinking about some ways you could add some variations. You could use the examples that I've done here, like the A, B, A, C, A, B, A, D, or the A, B, C, D, A, B, E, F, or maybe try your own and come up with some different ones. Hey, sky's the limit. Alrighty, so we've looked at how to write riffs using scales, we've looked at how to enhance the rhythms of your riffs, and how to properly structure your riffs. So there's one more thing I want to look at, and that is how to write riffs using chord progressions. So I suppose this is like an extension of writing riffs using scales, using chord progressions instead. This is a very, very common trick that people use. Sometimes you'll look at a riff from a band that you like, and you're just thinking, how the hell did they come up with that? You know, it's just like one long stream of notes that just seems like almost random. And you think like, why did they pick those specific notes? It doesn't really make any sense to me. And I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10, the guitarist has started with some sort of chord progression in mind and they've written the riff around that progression. Because for a lot of bands, songs start live as just a very basic chord progression. Let's say, for example, just E minor to C. But obviously in metal, you don't just want to play those chords over the song, you know, it's going to sound a bit weird. You want to somehow riffify this progression and make it more metal, right? So in this first example, I'm going to show you how I turn that progression, E minor to C, and back again, into a riff. Let's have a look. Okay, so as you can see here, I've rooted myself around this E minor position, right? Around this E minor standard bar chord. And so I think, okay, I'm in E minor. I know I have the notes of the chord to work with, but I can also fill it out with the notes of the E minor scale. So I know I have all of this real estate to work with here. And also because we're in E, we can use the bottom string as like a pedal, right? So, what I decided to do was make a riff like this. It goes... You're just using like this bottom E as like a drone just to keep going, to keep the pulse, and then bouncing off notes of the scale that I've picked out. I've just gone to the 10 here on the D string, which is the 6th. Then I've gone to the 5th, which is the 9th fret on the D string. Yeah, it's just all notes that are around this chord that works. Again, you don't have to know like the ins and outs of the theory around this. You can get a lot of this done just through using your ear and a bit of trial and error. It's just a case of like knowing that you have the notes of the chord here and then filling in the notes around it. You know, that could mean that you could use like, you could do that or... Or that. Or that. Basically, any notes that you want to use that are around this chord, yeah, will work just fine. And next up is the C. I decided to make my riff around this C bar chord here. You know, I could have gone down here to this C, but I kind of like how the C sounds here on like the A string. It sounds really like bitey. I really like that. So, bearing in mind what we were talking about with structure before, I wanted to do something a little different on these next 2 bars. I didn't just want to keep doing the same rhythm. You know, I could have just carried on the same vein and just gone like... Could have done that, you know, that sounds perfectly fine. But I like to have a little bit of variation and a bit of contrast, so I decided to vary the rhythms a bit. So what I did, I decided to just play this C bar chord. And then flatten that down to the 4, which makes like a kind of a Lydian thing. And then just play a C major dyad here, 3 and 2. So we're going... And this really, really highlights this movement to C. When you pick out notes like this, like the 3rd, you're really going to emphasize the chord that you've moved to. But again, you know, it's just all about trial and error and just playing around with what notes work. So how I would approach this if I didn't know any theory was to, again, just decide on the chord I want to go to and then just start playing around with the notes that are around the chord. So like you could go like a major or like a Lydian thing. I mean, really, like, there's no correct way to write riffs, yeah? There's, of course, these standard frameworks that you can use as, like, a jumping-off point to guide you. Yeah, but there's no, like, correct way to do it. Just play around and use your ears and, yeah, have fun. But, yeah, what I decided to do was do this. And then on the second time, move up to the D. Again, using these dyads. I really like using dyads in riffs, I don't know, it's just a lot of fun. And that leads up nicely going back to the E. So that was with a relatively simple chord progression. What if we add a few more chords to make it a bit busier? For example, we could use this progression. We could do like a bar of E minor, and then a bar of D, and a bar of A minor, and then G, D. So, you know, if you wanted to go full singer-songwriter, you could just go. But of course, that's not very metal, is it? So we want to try and riffify this progression somehow. So in this next example, I'm going to show you how I turned this chord progression into a riff. So as you can see, I started with a similar principle to the previous example. I just start off doing this kind of pedal point thing around E minor. But because we're going to D now, I decided to keep the rhythm going because, you know, I had 2 bars of it in the previous example. So we're going to have another bar of this, but we're going to move it down to D. So it's a similar thing, but obviously we can't use the bottom E anymore because we're moving to a D chord. So we've got to use this D here as a pedal. Then I'm just bouncing off the 5th and the 6th here. So we're just kind of taking the same shape but moving it down. And then we go into an A minor. So there's lots of things we could have done here. You could have done something using like the open A as like a pedal. Something like that, or like you could have gone up here. But what I decided to do in the end was to arpeggiate an A minor here. To starting on the 3rd, so 10th fret on the D string. I just decided to like bring the riff up a little higher. Thought it could be cool, create a bit more contrast. Because we start off going down. So instead of going down again, I thought it'd be cool just to go up. And I decided to add a little bit of a twiddly bit in here. Because I feel like if you're going to add some sort of like flair or some sort of busier bit, it kind of sounds cool to put it in the middle. As a bit of like sort of a tension in your riff. All I'm doing here, I'm just sticking around like A minor. So you've got an A minor arpeggio here that I'm doing. Then I'm sliding up to the A, like the octave here. And then going up the next octave. You know, it's all just A still. And then back. And then pulling off the minor 3rd, the 15. And up to the 4th. I really like that. I like that kind of like snaky, kind of like polyphia kind of sounding riffs. I really like those. But then I decided, you know, if I carried on doing that into the next bar, it would be a little bit much and sort of, I don't know, I didn't want the riff to be like that fiddly or that twiddly. So I decided to keep things simple for the last bar. And we have G and D in the last bar. And all I'm doing is just highlighting like the dyads of both of those chords. So we're starting off the G here, just the root in the 3rd, and then go down to the D here. But again, there's loads of different things I could have done there. Could have done that, like highlighting the major 3rd there. That sounds kind of cool. Just playing like the you know, the 5th and the octave of a D power chord here. Or could have added like a little twiddly bit at the end. That could have been cool. But yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about riff writing, right? The possibilities are literally endless. And I think actually that's part of the problem when it comes to riff writing, is that the possibilities are just so endless and infinite. People just get like very hung up on the little details and sort of get lost and like bogged down in like the intricacies of it. So there you go, guys. That concludes my riff writing masterclass. I sincerely hope that these principles that I shared with you, that I use in my own writing and that many other people use, has been helpful for you, and I hope that it will aid you in your own writing. So please do feel free to download all of the drum tracks I provided with you for this lesson and just start playing around and making your own riffs using these principles. And please do share them because I would love to hear what you come up with. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me, either comment down below or reach out to me on the Guitar School Discord. I'll be happy to help. But good luck, happy riffing, and I'll see you for next lesson.